Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to react to a comment that somebody left me in a video I did about, I've done several videos recently about the Oromo, and I've done so many videos about the Oromo people. And somebody asked me, why is there a theory that the Oromo are maybe linked to the ancient Romans? This is something I've seen elsewhere, actually. It's one of those theories that fly around. It's not like in the mainstream, but once in a while you'll get people talk about it or it's brought up. And I remember I've done a video where I was looking at different theories that the Europeans were putting across about the origin of the Oromo people. And these are documents from 17th century, the ones I've seen, especially written by the Catholic Church. I think the Jesuits did write some documents about the Oromo, very interesting documents. And of course, the Portuguese did write documents that mentioned the Oromo. And of course, different other people have written about the Oromo, Europeans especially, who are coming to Africa and trying to understand the people. And this is not just the Oromo, of course. There are so many documents that discuss about different groups of Africans. And now, this thinking or this speculation or this theory of the Oromo having some link to ancient Romans, of course, there have been, I've seen others say, oh, the Oromo have links to the Gauls of France. Some have said that they have links, their origin, that is, that they have some link to the Jews and such talk. Much of it, of course, are just theories. And this one, I don't think is any different. It's just a theory that, and most of these theories were actually created by the Europeans who were trying to understand the Africans. And the Europeans, I remember I read, I think it was John Boye's book, The King of the Wakikuyu, and I saw something similar. When he went to a Kikuyu village and he will meet, for example, the so-called chiefs, even though they were not chiefs, like a leader of the people, or an elder who will come meet him. And the first thing he did, seems like the first thing he did was to look at them, how they looked physically. And some of them you'll note that they looked very European, for example, their features. And it's like there was this thing, and same thing with Richard Maynard Sagen, another person I've read his document. These are documents from early 1900s. And it seems like the early Europeans to come to Africa, they had this problem. And the problem they had was they came with the understanding or the perception that Africans were a different, specifically species. They did not say that, but that's the impression you get, that they somehow saw Africans as a different species. They did not see how Africans could be like Europeans in terms of how they looked, and also in terms of their character and behavior and culture and political structures that they had in place. They did not see that. They expected and they wanted Africans to be the other, the different from the European. And so when they came to Africa, and you'll see these a lot in the old documents, and they saw something that was close to European. If it was the way somebody looked, for example, John Boyes, the way he looked, he does describe two or three or four individuals, several individuals actually in his document, who looked European. He will add something else on top of it. He will, for example, say they were more intelligent than the other Africans. Like, just for by them looking more European, he will automatically jump to the conclusion that they are more intelligent than the other Africans. And the less they looked, than the more different they looked from the Europeans, the more he assigned the character or the value of them not being intelligent. I've seen that a lot in this document, and it's very, very interesting. Now, even how people looked when they found an African who looked more Europeans, they seem to try to understand why was that so. And often they will lean towards a theory that most likely this person is not from here, or his ancestors are not from here. This person might, looks like, or is likely came from elsewhere and joined the society. That's why they look different, or they look more European, or that's why they are more intelligent. I think it's the same thing happening when you hear the story of the Oromo being linked to the Gauls of France, or being linked to the ancient Romans. It's the same thing happens. And I think there is a specific reason why anybody who made the argument that the Oromo have anything to do with the ancient Romans, there's something they were looking at, and I know what they were looking at, or at least I can speculate what they were looking at. What they were looking at was the Gadaa system. The Gadaa system threw off the early Europeans who came to visit. They come to this society, they look at it, and they see the Gadaa system, the political structure that is, and it threw them off. They could not understand how possible, or they could not understand how it was possible that a group of people in the middle of Black Africa would have such a robust Republican organization. I think that's what it was. It was about the Oromo being Republicans, or having their political organization being a republic, and not just a simple republic, but a very robust republic. That became problematic to the early explorers and early Europeans to visit. And so they were trying to understand, where did this come from? How did these people end up having such a robust republic organization, or a republic actually? What happened here? And so the only thing, or the only way they could explain it in their heads, and of course then write it down, is that the only way that's possible is that either these people came from elsewhere, or somebody came from elsewhere and introduced this idea to them. And it's actually the same thing when you read some of the documents that talk about the Buganda kingdom and the Bunyoro Kitara, the kingdoms that were found in what we know today as Uganda. There is a tendency of the Europeans to try to seek somebody from outside, and they talk of the Bachwezi, I think that's what they are called, who they say are light-skinned. Again, the light-skinned, the more intelligent, and then we can assign the ability to build very complex structures, political structures. And that's what was happening there. Now, it's the same thing with the Oromo. The Oromo confused the early Europeans with their Gadaa system. It is very republic. It's a very robust republic. It's actually very identical in so many ways to the ancient Roman Republic. And I've read Titus Livius' books from the founding of the city, where he tells you the structure and the day-to-day running of the ancient Roman Republic. And when you start to study the Gadaa system, you see parallels. You see how similar they are. But you even come to the conclusion that the Gadaa system looks more robust than the ancient Roman Republic. So that's where that came from, if you ask me. But here is a thing that we need to be very aware of, is that Africans had, I think, the most republics than any other parts of the world. While Europe in the 18th, 19th century was, we can say, up to 99% monarchies, Africa was, I would say, up to 70% republics. And so it's not just the Oromo who had a republic, it's just that theirs is more feasible. The moment you just interact with them, you see it. But other people did have, and another group of people who had a republic that is also very robust and very um, elaborate are the Akikuyu. The Akikuyu had the Kiama structure that is very republican. And we can also talk of the Nandi. The Nandi had a republic, the Kipsigis had a republic, the Kisi was a republic, the Akamba was a republic. Very different groups of people we know today as tribes were actually republics. And that goes to Tanzania and Uganda. Of course, Uganda has a lot more monarchies, or did have a lot more monarchies, but it did also have republics that were around. I think the rest of Africa had a lot more republics than monarchies. But here is another thing that the early Europeans did, and is to recognize monarchies and to celebrate them and to talk a lot more about them, because to them a monarchy was in fact, when you read some of these old documents, and I've read, for example, Ludwig Kraft's books. Ludwig Krafft wrote this. Most of these books were written in 1850s, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and he interacted with African societies before there was any much change. And Ludwig Krafft is one of the few European scholars who identify the African societies as republics. In fact, he uses that exact word to describe the Wakwafi nation, which some say it is the Maasai, but he doesn't say it's the Maasai. He says that that's a separate society, but actually the Maasai have a similar structure of a republic. but then they have a high priest. And most of these republics also had either one high priest or several high priests who performed the religious functions. So coming back to the Oromo, I don't think the Oromo had any, we can say, origins from ancient Romans. That I don't think that happened. Maybe with history we can never say anything for that is for sure, for sure. But the Oromo are just another African nation that chose a republican form of government, and they became so good at it that when the Europeans came, they struggled to understand how was that even possible. Those are my random thoughts.